lesson 4 of data cleaning. We're now going to talk about character encodings. This is a kind of a topic that pops up in certain situations where you're loading text files that have lots of raw data in a text format where it's mostly strings. And it's something that you don't always run into, but when you do run into this problem, it becomes a big challenge to try to figure out how it works. To get started with this lesson, let's go ahead and load our different libraries that we're going to be using. In this case, we're using another library that Chardet, which is helping us with character encoding and understanding what character encoding means. Here's a whole section on what is character encoding. In a nutshell, character encoding is a method in which we can store strings that are not just Latin letters and numbers and things like that. You can store emojis, you can store all different kinds of script from all different languages, Japanese, Chinese, anything. Encoding is a way to basically characterize any type of symbol or character or anything like that in Python as a string. And you might run into problems as you open files that have different kinds of sources. If you need to convert to a more standard character encoding, then you'll be able to do that if you understand this lesson. I'm not going to go into all the details of character encoding because it is a more advanced concept. One of the things that you really do need to know is that the kind of standard character encoding, UTF-8, is something that we ideally try to convert things into. If we load files that have other types of character encodings, we're trying to figure out how to load that, how to account for those mismatches, and then output as a UTF-8 file. Let's get a little understanding of what character encoding looks like. Here is a string that includes the euro symbol. So the euro symbol is a character that you don't always use, especially if you're not in the EU. It's not generally on every keyboard out there. It's on European keyboards, it's common, but on non-European keyboards, it's not. Here is a string that includes the symbol itself. That type of this variable, the variable type is a string. And if you convert a variable, here you have another variable that we've created called after. We took before, we've encoded it in UTF-8. And what you have when you run that after is a new type of object called a bytes object. And a bytes object is interchangeable in a lot of ways with a string. But you can see that in a bytes object, that euro symbol is converted into a different type of format, which it describes over above, which we don't want to dive into this kind of detail because it's not really that important to understand how this works unless you dive into really deep Python development. But you just have just an understanding that there is something called encoding, and that's a process that sometimes you have to go through when you load files. Here we encode, and now we're decoding again back to UTF-8 so you can get the symbol back. You can run into errors though. This is really common that if you try to decode something as a different type of encoding, you'll run into a certain error. I'm not going to read this to you. You can read through this to get some of the nuance of this, but I want to zoom down to, and this is a chunk of code which is reinforcing that lesson right there. The main takeaway I want you to get from this particular lesson is how to read files that have encoding problems. If you get a text file and you're loading it and it's not encoded with UTF-8, then you're going to run into issues. And Python expects that by default. If you try to load a file with .read_csv from a file that is not encoded in UTF-8, you'll get errors that look like this. You can see this really long error. It's basically essentially saying that it's giving a Unicode decode error. What you need to do with files like this is you can use, for example, the Chardet library. You can run this chunk of code here. This particular library has a function called .detect. And .detect is looking at this file. It's determining what type of encoding that it can find and a certain confidence level. So it's 73% confident it's found this encoding Windows-1252. What you need to do then is when you run into situations like this, you need to load that file with .read_csv and specify exactly what encoding that file has. In this case, Windows-1252. And it looks like it worked. It looks like you're able to load this file in and see what's inside. And it basically allows you to open files that are maybe a bit older or created by different types of programs or encoded in different ways. And then, of course, before you move on, you generally want to take that encoded in the right, that chunk of data that's encoded in the right way with UTF-8 and export it as its own file in the right format, so you don't have to run into problems later. Character encodings is a more advanced topic, but as a beginner, you will potentially run into this and you need to understand how to troubleshoot that if needed. To deepen your understanding of this, there's a whole nother exercise which you can dive into to understand how to solidify that understanding of character encodings.